The text I wasn't supposed to see, the one from her lover, called me a pushover. And he was right. I'd agreed to their open relationship to save a marriage that was already dead. I played the part of the sad, supportive, middle-aged husband, the conventional man she was evolving past. What they both forgot in their enlightened, progressive new life is that I'm an architect, and an architect knows exactly where to find the load-bearing walls and precisely what it takes to bring the whole structure down. The silence in the house had become a physical thing. It was a presence with weight and texture, clinging to the minimalist surfaces I had so carefully designed. Our son, Leo, had been gone for 2 months, swallowed by a university on the other side of the country, and the quiet he left behind wasn't peaceful. It was an echo chamber for everything unsaid between Qley and me. I'd designed this house for us, for our family, a structure of glass and steel and polished concrete, built on a foundation of what I thought was solid ground. Now the floor-to-ceiling windows just seemed to invite the vast, indifferent sky inside, and the open-plan living space felt exposed, vacant. I stood at the kitchen island, the cold marble pressing into my palms, watching Qley. She was curled on the low-slung Italian sofa, a space we'd bought to watch movies together, but she was in her own world. The blue light of her phone painted her face in ghostly tones, one earbud nestled in her ear. A thin, cloying scent of lemongrass and eucalyptus snaked from the diffuser on the end table. A new addition to our home that she claimed was for clearing negative energy. To me, it just smelled like an expensive hotel lobby, another layer of sterile perfection over the growing void. "Dinner's almost ready," I said. My voice too loud in the stillness. She didn't look up. Just a slight, dismissive wave of her hand. "I'm not really hungry. I had a nutrient paste smoothie earlier." "Right. The paste." I turned back to the pan, where a salmon fillet I'd marinated for hours was sizzling. The smell of garlic and dill, once a comforting aroma in our home, now felt like an intrusion on her curated atmosphere of wellness. For 20 years, we had cooked together. Now my cooking was an interruption to her nutrient schedule. I plated the fish, sat at the long oak table we never used anymore, and ate alone. The sound of my fork against the ceramic was like a gunshot in the quiet. Across the room, Qley's thumb moved in a slow, steady scroll. She was 45, but in the ethereal glow of the screen, she looked timeless, preserved. She had thrown herself into a new identity since Leo left, a persona built from podcasts and influencers who spoke in a smooth, therapeutic cadence about authenticity and personal truths. When I finished, I cleared my plate, washed it, and dried it. The familiar ritual, a small anchor in the drifting silence. I walked over to the sofa. "Qley?" She pulled the earbud out, her expression one of polite impatience. "What is it, Mark?" "I was just thinking, maybe we could take that trip to Portugal, the one we talked about for my 50th. My birthday was still 2 years away, but I was grasping at futures, at anything that felt like a plan we were making together. She set her phone down. Screen first, a gesture of finality that sent a chill through me. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time all evening. Her eyes, the same ones I'd fallen in love with over a drafting table in college, were clear and steady. There was no warmth in them. "Mark," she said, her voice calm, measured, practiced. "We need to talk. About us. About the next chapter." My heart did a slow, painful lurch. "Okay." I sat in the armchair opposite her, the leather sighing under my weight. She leaned forward, her hands clasped. It was her pitch posture, the one she used with potential investors for the wellness startups she advised. "I love you," she began. The 3 words delivered like a legal disclaimer before the bad news. "You are my rock." But I feel stifled, constricted. The life we've built is beautiful, but it's a container. And I need to grow outside of it. I couldn't feel the chair beneath me. "What does that mean? Do you want a divorce?" The word came out like a shard of glass. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "God, no. A divorce is such a failure of imagination. It's a destructive act. I'm interested in a creative act, an evolution. I just stared, my mind a blank wall. I don't understand. An open relationship, Mark. She said the words as if she were offering me a gift. A way for us to explore our own paths, our own connections as individuals. To be our most authentic selves. It would make us stronger. It would prove our trust is absolute. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. The architect in me saw the clean lines of our life collapsing, the structural integrity gone. This wasn't a proposal. It was a demolition. All I could see was her with someone else. Some other man, in some other bed. The image was a visceral blow, knocking the wind out of me. "You've thought this through," I said. It wasn't a question, of course. I've been processing it for months. And I think for it to work, for us to feel safe, we need rules, boundaries. She started listing them, her voice never wavering. It was a business plan for the dismantling of our marriage. 1. Full transparency. We tell each other everything. No secrets. 2. No one from our professional or immediate social circles. It has to be separate from this life. 3. Our finances remain completely separate in this. The house, our joint savings, our investments, they are ours together, untouchable. I listened, my head roaring. I clung to the rules like a man overboard clinging to a piece of wreckage. They were insane, but they were structure. They were a framework I could analyze. My fear was a cold, solid knot in my stomach. The fear of losing her. It was a primal terror that overrode everything else. I looked at her determined face, and I knew, with sickening certainty, that if I said no, she would walk. The open relationship wasn't a question. It was the terms of my surrender. "You've met someone," I stated, the words tasting like ash. She had the grace to hesitate, but only for a second. "I've made a connection. Yes, it's new." But it made me realize what I was missing. So this wasn't a theory. It was already happening. I was just being asked to sign off on the paperwork. I looked around the room I had built, at the woman I had built a life with. Her face was expectant, patient, as if she were waiting for a slow child to finally grasp a simple concept. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. My entire world, our entire history, was balanced on the edge of my answer, and the terror of the fall was more powerful than the pain of the compromise. "Okay," I whispered. The word was a betrayal of every instinct in my body. Qley's expression didn't soften with relief. It sharpened with satisfaction. A deal closed. She gave a single crisp nod. "Good. I'm glad you're being so evolved about this." She picked up her phone. As if on cue, the screen lit up, and the speakers, which I had so carefully integrated into the walls, chimed with the sound of an incoming text. The first few weeks of our evolution felt like walking on broken glass. The rules, which I'd clung to as a framework, revealed themselves to be nothing more than suggestions, easily bent by Qley to fit her narrative. The full transparency rule was the first to go. It became a one-way street. I was treated to vague summaries of her evenings. I had a lovely dinner with a friend, while she expected a detailed itinerary from me, which I had no interest in creating because I wasn't doing anything. I tried once. I downloaded an app. I met a woman for a drink at a sterile hotel bar downtown. She was a recent divorcee who talked exclusively about her lawyer. The entire hour felt like a transaction, a joyless act of contractual obligation. I couldn't do it. I paid the bill, went home, and took a shower that felt like it would never get me clean. The entire exercise was a farce, and it only amplified the acidic bitterness churning in my gut. Qley, on the other hand, was thriving. She was radiant. She'd always been charismatic, but now she moved with a new electric energy. She was never home. She'd started microdosing psilocybin, claimed it was unlocking her creativity, and spent hours on the phone, her voice a low, excited murmur. The cloying scent of lemongrass in the house was now mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of her wellness vape. She was a stranger who wore my wife's face. About a month into the arrangement, she decided to host a small get-together. Just a few people, she said, breezing through the kitchen. Potential investors for this new project I'm consulting on. You don't mind, do you? I minded. I minded that our home, my sanctuary, was being turned into a networking lounge for her new life. But I just nodded. Of course not. The night of the party, our living room was filled with people I didn't know. They were all younger, dressed in expensive, artfully casual clothes. The kind of people who called themselves creatives or disruptors. I felt like a museum exhibit in my own home. The supportive, middle-aged husband. I was refilling a bowl of olives when Qley grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in with an unfamiliar urgency. Mark, darling, there's someone I want you to meet. She pulled me toward a man standing by the vast window, silhouetted against the city lights. He was tall, but he slouched with a practiced nonchalance. He couldn't have been more than 35, with a sharp jaw, an expensive haircut that was meant to look messy, and a black t-shirt under a blazer that probably cost more than my first car. He held his phone like an extension of his hand. Mark, this is Julian, Qley said, her voice a pitch higher than usual. Julian, this is my husband, Mark. Julian gave me a quick, appraising glance and a handshake that was all pressure and no warmth. His skin was cold. Man, this house is sick, he said, his eyes scanning the ceiling beams. The lines are insane. Good work. I'm Julian Vance, he added, as if the name should mean something to me. Qley and I are collaborating. This new app she's developing? I'm building the back end. My blood went cold. I looked at Qley. Her smile was bright, brittle. Julian is a genius, Mark. He's the one who's helping me bring my vision to life. A collaborator, I said, the word feeling foreign. An app. This was the first I was hearing of her own app. She'd framed it as consulting. It's a total game changer, Julian said, tapping his phone. Wellness space. We're synergizing mindfulness with biofeedback. It's going to disrupt the entire vertical. I looked from his slick, confident face to Qley's adoring one. Qley, I said, keeping my voice low. Can I talk to you for a second? I led her to the small alcove by my study. What is this? I demanded, the bitterness I'd been swallowing for weeks finally rising. A collaborator? You said, no partners from our professional circles. She rolled her eyes, a sharp, dismissive gesture that struck me like a physical blow. Oh, Mark, don't be so possessive. He's not in your world. He's in tech. I'm in wellness. It's a synergy, not a conflict. You're being so conventional. Conventional? I hissed. We had rules, Qley. That was the one thing this was built on. They're guidelines, Mark, to help us transition, she countered, her voice hardening. This is exactly that old world thinking, that ownership model of marriage we are trying to move past. Julian is my partner, my business partner. Are you saying I can't have those now either? She was twisting my words, twisting the reality of what we'd agreed to. She was using the language of our evolution as a weapon to shut me down. She was making me the bad guy, the prude, the jailer. That's not what I'm saying, I said, my voice flat. But the fight had already gone out of me. I was checkmated. Good. She gave my arm a condescending pat. Now please try and be supportive. This is a big night for me. She turned and glided back to Julian, her laugh tinkling as he showed her something on his phone. I watched them, my hands clenched into fists. I felt a cold, sharp suspense settle over me. This wasn't an open relationship. This was a hostile takeover. I stayed in the alcove, hidden in the shadows of my own home, and watched them for the rest of the night. Later, after everyone had left, I was cleaning up the last of the wine glasses when Qley's phone, left on the island, lit up. It was on silent, but the screen flashed to life. A text. From Julian. I was 20 feet away, but the font was large. I didn't mean to read it, but I couldn't look away. He bought it. You were right, he's a pushover. My hand froze. Bought what? The lie about their collaboration? The rules? I looked at the glass in my hand, my knuckles white. A pushover. The word echoed in the vast, silent room. The bitterness was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper. A chilling, calculated clarity. She wasn't just breaking the rules. She was mocking me, and I had let her. The screen of Qley's phone went dark, but the words hung in the air, burned into my vision. He bought it. You were right. He's a pushover. My hand holding the last wine glass didn't tremble. I felt a strange, cold clarity settle over me, like a sheet of ice forming on a lake. I walked to the kitchen, the expensive weighted glass cool against my skin. I didn't throw it. I didn't smash it against the quartz countertop. I opened the dishwasher, slid the glass into the rack, and closed the door. The soft, insulated click was the only sound in the house. A pushover. I walked to my study. This was my space, the one room Qley's wellness crusade hadn't touched. The walls were unpainted, polished concrete. One was covered in bookshelves. The other held my old drafting table, its wood surface scarred with decades of cuts and graphite smudges. The air smelled of paper, ink, and the faint, dusty scent of old books. It was a room for building, for thinking. I sat in my chair, the old leather groaning. I'd been playing defense. I'd been trying to save a structure that was already rotten. A pushover. The word was a key, unlocking a door I had refused to open. I had been so afraid of losing her, I hadn't stopped to ask if she was already gone. I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen felt sterile. I'd been avoiding the details, trusting in the rules like a child. Rule 3. Our finances remain completely separate. The house, our joint savings, our investments. Untouchable. I logged into our joint home account. The one we used for the mortgage, the utilities, Leo's tuition. I scrolled past the predictable debits, the gas bill, the ridiculous fee for the organic lawn service Qley insisted on, the mortgage payment, and then I saw it. It was dated 2 weeks ago, the day after her investor party. A wire transfer. My eyes snagged on the amount and my breath hitched. $150,000. The blood drained from my face, my hands suddenly cold and clammy. The recipient was a name I didn't recognize. Auraspace LLC. I stared at the numbers. $150,000. It was from our home equity line, an account that required both our signatures. I didn't remember signing anything, but then I'd signed a stack of refinancing papers for the house a month ago. Qley had rushed me, said it was just optimizing our interest rate. I'd been distracted. I'd trusted her. I opened a new tab and typed Auraspace LLC into the search bar. The name was meaningless, but it felt sickeningly familiar. The search results were thin. A new business registration, filed just 6 weeks ago. I clicked the link, my heart pounding a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. The public filing was sparse. A registration date, an address, which was just a P.O. box, and a registered agent. My world tilted. The registered agent was Julian Vance. My breath came out in a sharp, ragged gasp. I gripped the edge of my desk, the cold aluminum biting into my palms. It wasn't a collaboration. It was a con. He wasn't just her lover. He was her accomplice. And they were funding it with my money. Our money. A cold electric rage, unlike anything I had ever felt, surged through me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a fluid interpretation of the rules. This was grand larceny. But what was it? What was Auraspace? I went back to my laptop, my movements precise. Qley was arrogant. She was careless because she thought I was a fool. We had a shared cloud drive, a legacy from when our lives were actually intertwined. We used it for tax documents, photos of Leo, household plans. I hadn't opened it in months. I clicked the icon. The file directory opened. Tucked between vacations and Leo College was a new folder. See Wellness. My mouse hovered over it. I clicked. Inside, more folders. Marketing strategy, financials, investor outreach, and one file that sat at the top. Auraspace Pitch Deck V5 PDF. I clicked. The document opened. The first slide was slick, minimalist, corporate. Auraspace, curating your inner architecture. The tagline made my skin crawl. I clicked to the next slide. A picture of Qley, glowing and serene, with a bio describing her as a visionary in the integrated wellness space. Next, a picture of Julian, described as a serial disruptor and back-end architect. I clicked through slides filled with buzzwords: synergy, biofeedback, holistic, disrupt. It was all meaningless, polished noise. Then I landed on slide 12. The core concept, the resonance effect. I stopped. I couldn't breathe. On the screen was a diagram. It was a complex, elegant rendering showing the geometric relationship between light, sound, and physical space. It was my diagram. I wasn't in my study anymore. I was 25, back in my sweltering graduate studio. I could smell the sharp tang of graphite, the acidic sweetness of stale coffee, the hot ozone from the plotter. I could feel the ache in my hand from 3 sleepless nights, drawing that exact diagram. It was the core of my thesis, my one and only attempt at merging my architectural discipline with human psychology. I'd called it the resonance effect. My hand shaking, clicked the next slide. The Auraspace Hub, a new architecture for being. It was a rendering. A beautiful, sleek building of glass and curved wood. And it was mine. It was a simplified, commercialized, bastardized version of my thesis design. A design I had shown to only one person in the world in a fit of passionate late-night dreaming 20 years ago. Qley. She had stolen it. She hadn't just stolen my money. She had reached back 2 decades into the most private, passionate part of my creative mind and ripped out my soul. She had excavated my life's work and handed it to her lover, repackaged as a wellness app. The open relationship, the rules, the endless hollow talk of evolution and personal growth. It was all a lie. A meticulously constructed distraction. A smokescreen to cover the single greatest heist of my life. She wasn't evolving. She was committing fraud. I closed the laptop. The quiet click echoed in the concrete room. The bitterness I'd felt for weeks was gone. The hurt, the jealousy, the fear of being abandoned, it all evaporated. In its place was a vast, cold, and perfect calm. It was the absolute stillness of a problem finally, completely understood. I thought of the word pushover. I thought of the stolen money. I thought of my stolen work. Okay, I whispered to the dark, silent room. Okay, Qley. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a fresh, blank drafting pad and a .5mm graphite pencil. You want to build something? I said, my voice steady. Let's build. The next morning, the sun streamed through the east-facing windows of the kitchen, just as I designed it to. It lit the dust motes dancing in the air, turning them into tiny, glittering diamonds. I was nursing a cup of black coffee. The taste was bitter, acrid, but it was real. It grounded me. I heard the thump, thump, thump of Qley's bare feet on the oak stairs. She appeared in the doorway, a vision in a silk robe, her hair piled in a messy, artful knot. She was glowing, energized. She didn't look at me, but went straight to the industrial-grade blender. God, I slept so well, she announced, her voice bright. She started pulling ingredients from the fridge. Spinach, a bag of some beige powder, almond milk, a vial of some dark liquid. Julian and I had the most incredible breakthrough last night. We've been stuck on the UI for weeks, and it just unlocked. The blender roared to life, a high-pitched mechanical scream that filled the kitchen. It sounded like a raw nerve. I watched her, my hand steady on my mug. I saw the muscles in her back, the curve of her neck. I felt nothing. No jealousy, no longing, just a cold, analytical distance. I was an architect studying a structure for weaknesses. She poured the gray-green sludge into a glass. He's a genius, Mark, truly. He just sees things differently. I nodded, summoning the face of the man from yesterday. The sad, compliant husband, the pushover. That's great, Qley. I'm glad it's going so well for you. She finally turned to me, surprised by my lack of friction. She smiled, a quick, patronizing flash of teeth. Thank you, Mark. That means a lot. She came over and kissed the top of my head, a gesture of casual, thoughtless ownership. Her robe smelled of lemongrass, and that other metallic tang I now associated with her. I have to run. We're meeting with a new seed investor this afternoon. Okay. Good luck, I said. my voice quiet. She breezed out, leaving her glass in the sink. The door chimed softly as she left. I was alone. The house was mine. I went to my study. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't go to the shared drive. I didn't look at the bank account. I opened a new private browsing window and started my research. I wasn't looking for a divorce attorney. I was looking for a predator. I typed in top IP litigation, intellectual property theft, San Francisco, and shark. I cross-referenced names from legal journals, articles about high-stakes tech lawsuits, and forums where burned founders went to rage. One name kept appearing, Annalise Reed, Reed & Associates. We don't just win, we dismantle. Her website was brutalist, just black and white text, no stock photos of smiling people, just a list of multi-million-dollar judgments. I used a new encrypted email service to send a message. I kept it simple. Consultation, IP theft and corporate fraud. I have definitive, time-stamped proof of original creation and documented fraudulent transfer of funds. An automated reply came back instantly. A link to a calendar, a meeting for the next day, in person, $2,000 for the first hour. I booked it. With that done, I moved to the next, more important task. The digital evidence was one thing. I needed the physical. My study had a wall of built-in flat file cabinets. My archives. I hadn't opened the bottom drawers in years. I pulled the long aluminum handle. The drawer slid out with a heavy, smooth shushing sound. It smelled of old paper, fixative, and dust. I sifted past old commercial projects, blueprints for buildings that now dotted the city skyline. And then in the very back, I found it. A black archival quality portfolio, zipped shut. My name was embossed in small silver letters in the corner. My heart was beating, but my hands were steady. I laid the portfolio on my drafting table and pulled the zipper. It sounded like a tearing cloth in the silence. I opened the cover. There it was, my thesis. The resonance effect, an architecture of psychological space. It was all there. 22 pages of hand-drafted plates on heavy vellum, the precise 0.3 mm graphite lines, the hand lettering, the complex diagrams of light and sound, the final sweeping renderings of the building itself, and on the first page, in the bottom right corner, a small, neat block of text. My name, my professor's signature, and the date. 23 years ago, I ran my finger over the raised graphite. I had poured my entire soul into this. It was the best work I had ever done. Work I had abandoned because Qley had told me it was too academic, not practical. I carefully removed each page. I went back to my laptop. I bought a new encrypted flash drive, the kind with a pin pad on it, for same-day delivery. While I waited, I logged back into the shared drive. I systematically downloaded everything. The Auraspace Pitch Deck v5.pdf. The financials folder, which contained their projections based on the $150,000 of my money. The marketing folder. I went to the bank website and downloaded the PDF of the wire transfer. I downloaded the LLC registration. I put it all in one, password-protected folder on my desktop. When the drive arrived, I transferred the folder. I wiped the download history. I cleared my browser cache. I ran a utility to erase the free space on my hard drive. I put the USB drive in my pocket. It felt as heavy as a stone. I took my original thesis pages to the high-end art scanner I kept in my office. I scanned each one at the highest possible resolution, capturing the texture of the paper, the pencil strokes, the professor's ink signature. I added these files to the USB drive. Then I placed the original vellum sheets back in their portfolio, zipped it shut, and put it in the trunk of my car. I had the case. When Qley came home that evening, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. For real this time. I was chopping onions, the sharp, pungent smell filling the air. She was buzzing, her face flushed with excitement. "Mark, you will not believe the day I had. This investor, he's in. He's ready to double our seed funding. Can you believe it? Wow, Qley, that's..." I looked up, letting my shoulders slump, perfectly performing the sad husband. That's amazing, really. She sensed my low energy, and her face softened, but it was the same patronizing look. Oh, honey, I know this is still hard. I see you moping. What did you do today? You didn't just sit in your study all day, did you? I gave a small, weary sigh. No, actually, I was just digging through some old files. Old projects? I shrugged. Just feeling a little lost, I guess. She came over and rubbed my back. Her touch was a violation, but I didn't flinch. It's okay to feel lost, Mark, she said, her voice dripping with the therapeutic language she'd adopted. But you'll find your new path. Maybe this is a good thing for you, too. A chance to reinvent yourself. I looked at her. At her bright, oblivious eyes, her self-satisfied smile. She had no idea. She was looking at a pushover. She couldn't see the architect. Yeah, I said, and turned back to the onions. Maybe it is. The elevator was a silent glass box, ascending the side of a steel and glass tower downtown. With every floor, the city spread out below, a vast, complex blueprint of my own life and work. I felt detached, like I was studying a model, not a place I lived. The 40th floor opened into a reception area that was less an office and more a statement of intent. The floor was polished black marble. The walls were a stark gallery white. There was no art, only a single, massive window overlooking the bay. The water a flat, gray sheet under the overcast sky. The air was cold and dry, smelling of nothing at all, as if it had been scrubbed of any human element. Mr. Jensen? The receptionist didn't look up from her screen. Ms. Reed will be with you in a moment. Please have a seat. I sat in a chair that looked more like a sculpture than furniture. It was brutally uncomfortable. A glass of water appeared on a coaster beside me. I took a sip. It tasted like an absinthe, like distilled neutrality. 5 minutes later, a door I hadn't even seen, set flush into the wall, opened. Annalise Reed was not what I expected. She was small, fine-boned, and dressed in a dark gray suit so perfectly tailored it looked like armor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a knot so tight it seemed to pull at her skin. She wore no jewelry, just a slim, severe watch. She didn't offer a hand. Mr. Jensen, you have 1 hour, she said, her voice a precise, clipped instrument. My paralegal is taking notes. The clock is running. Let's not waste time on emotion. Your email mentioned fraud. She walked into a conference room, and I followed, my briefcase feeling suddenly heavy and old-fashioned. The room was dominated by a table of polished dark wood that reflected the gray sky like a coffin lid. I sat. She sat opposite me. There was no small talk. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and completely devoid of sympathy. I had planned to ease into it, to play the part of the wounded husband to gauge her reaction. I could see in an instant that it would be a critical mistake. She wasn't a therapist. She was a weapon. I had to aim her. I stopped being a victim and became an architect presenting a case. Right, I said. I opened my briefcase. I took out the archival portfolio first and laid it on the dark reflective wood. This is the original, my graduate thesis. Dated and signed 1998. I then placed the small black encrypted flash drive next to it. This is the evidence. The pin is 1998, the year of creation. Annalise Reed's left eyebrow rose, just a fraction. It was the first sign of interest she'd shown. She took the drive, plugged it into a port on the table, and entered the pin. Her screen embedded in the desk lit up. I couldn't see it, but I knew what was on it. I watched her face. It was the only source of information. She opened the portfolio. She didn't just look at it. She examined it. She ran a single unmanicured finger over the vellum, over my professor's inked signature. She saw the date, then her eyes flicked to her screen. I could hear the faint, rapid click, click, click of her mouse. She was comparing them. My scan from 1998, their pitch deck from 3 weeks ago. The silence in the room stretched. It was no longer a neutral silence. It was charged, taut. She clicked again. I knew she was at the bank transfer. The LLC registration. She read for a full, uninterrupted minute. Then she looked up. Her eyes were no longer neutral. They were bright. It wasn't warmth. It was the cold, sharp glitter of a predator that has just scented blood. "Mr. Jensen," she said, and her voice had a new edge, a hum of controlled excitement. "This isn't a case. This is a detonation. This is the cleanest, most flagrant case of IP theft and common law fraud I have seen in 5 years." She leaned forward. "Your wife and her partner haven't just stolen your concept. They've stolen your asset. They've used fraudulent means to secure funding. And they've documented every step of their conspiracy. The pitch deck is a signed confession. Your thesis is the smoking gun. The wire transfer is the jail time." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Jail time?" "Potentially," she said dismissively, as if that were a minor detail. "That's for the district attorney. We're interested in the money. Mr. Jensen, what do you want?" "I want my work back," I said, the old familiar hurt rising. "I want the money they stole. I want them to stop." Annalise Reed almost smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "No, that's thinking too small. You are the sole, legal, and demonstrable creator of the entire intellectual framework of aura space. You don't just want your money back. Mr. Jensen, you want their money." She stood up and began to pace, a sudden, contained explosion of energy. "We don't just sue. We file for a preliminary injunction and a temporary restraining order. We freeze their assets, all of them. The LLC, the new seed funding, their personal accounts, if we can prove commingling," which she tapped her screen. "They have been stupid enough to do. We don't just stop them. We take the entire company, all its assets and all its funding, and we deliver it to you. Punitive damages will be in the 7-figure range, minimum." A cold, clean thrill, sharp as a paper cut, ran down my spine. This was it. This was the dismantling. This was the other side of bitterness. "It was calculation. What do I do?" I asked. Her pacing stopped. She fixed me with her stare. "You go home. You do nothing. You're the sad, moping, compliant husband. You are the pushover. You do not change a single password. You do not confront your wife. You let her and Mr. Vance continue. Let them talk to more investors. Let them secure more funding. Let them build this house of cards as high as it will go." She picked up a heavy metal pen from her desk. "Every dollar they take in, based on your foundation, is a dollar we take from them, plus damages. They are building your victory for you. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said. My voice was perfectly steady. "Good. We wait for the moment of their greatest triumph, the moment they are most exposed, the moment they have the most to lose. We need a target, a product launch, a major investor announcement, something public." "She's planning something," I said, the thought forming as I spoke. "She's been frantic about a new venue. A launch. Find out when, Annalise. Find out where. Get me that, and I will handle the rest." When I got home that night, the smell of lemongrass and eucalyptus hit me like a wall. Qley was on the sofa, her back to me, laptop glowing. She was on a muted video call, but she was vibrating with an arrogant, manic energy. "Mark?" She called out, not turning. "God, you look like a ghost. Where have you been? Moping around those old buildings downtown?" I closed the door, arranging my face into the familiar mask of weary resignation. "Just walking, thinking." She finally turned, her patience clearly thin. "Well, I need you to pull it together, seriously. Our big launch party is in 2 weeks. I've just secured the most amazing venue. It's going to be a massive press and investor event. The official start of Aura Space." She looked at me, her eyes critical. "I need you to be there, right by my side, smiling, supportive. Can you do that for me?" She was handing me the detonation codes. I looked at my wife, the stranger who had stolen my life, and I smiled the saddest, most convincing smile of my life. 2 weeks, I said, my voice a hollow echo of the man I was. "Of course, Qley, whatever you need." The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in duplicity. I lived 2 lives under one roof. Outwardly, I was the ghost of Mark Jensen, the moping pushover, the supportive, cuckolded husband. I nodded when Qley complained about the caterer. I offered a dull, lifeless opinion on lighting schemes. I sat at the kitchen island and helped her proofread the press release, my fingers typing out the very lies that were destroying me, a visionary concept from the mind of Qley Jensen. No. Visionary is too much, don't you think? I'd murmur, playing my part. Maybe revolutionary? You're right. God revolutionary is so much stronger. See, this is why I need you, she'd say, patting my hand, her eyes already on her phone, firing off the change to her PR team. She had shared the guest list with me on a collaborative spreadsheet, asking me to check for any old contacts I might want to add. It was a list of her new life: tech VCs, wellness influencers, and a small, curated group of journalists. I saw Julian's name all over it, his notes in a different color. They were a team, a unit, and I was their mascot. Every night I'd lie next to her in our bed, the space between us a cold, vast territory. I'd listen to the soft tick-tick-tick of her phone as she messaged Julian, planning her triumph. I'd close my eyes and picture Annalise Reed's face, cold and sharp as a scalpel. Let them build the house of cards as high as it will go. With 3 days left, the official embossed Evite arrived in my inbox. You are invited to the unveiling of Auraspace. The venue was a new, obscenely expensive event hall downtown called the Apex. The date. The time, 7 p.m. This was the final piece. I forwarded it, without comment, to Annalise's secure email address. Her reply came in under an hour. Come in tomorrow, at 4 p.m. We finalized the timeline. The next day, I sat in that same brutally uncomfortable chair, in that same cold, sterile reception area. The air still smelled like nothing. Annalise Reed's office was a vacuum. She didn't waste time on greetings. She pulled me into the conference room. The dark table reflected the bright afternoon sun, a harsh, interrogating glare. The petition for the temporary restraining order is drafted, she said, her voice a low, precise hum. The motion for the asset freeze is filed and sealed, pending the hearing. The lawsuit for fraud, IP theft, and punitive damages is complete. It cites 42 separate counts of actionable malfeasance. She slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a timeline, a script for a demolition. Key PM. Our process server gains entry to the Apex, identifying as an investor. 5:00 p.m., the event begins. 7:30 p.m., Qley Jensen and Julian Vance are scheduled to take the stage. 7:31 p.m. As they begin their presentation, our server will walk on stage and serve them both, personally, with the lawsuit and the TRO. 7:32 p.m. Simultaneously, I will be on the phone with the bank's general counsel, executing the asset freeze. The $2 million in new seed funding they just secured? It will be locked. The LLC account, frozen. Their personal accounts, frozen. 7:35 p.m. By the time your wife understands the papers in her hand, she will be, for all intents and purposes, destitute. I stared at the meticulous, weaponized timeline. And me? You, Annalise said, fixing me with her dark, unblinking stare, will be in the audience. You will be the shocked, betrayed husband. Your presence is critical. It grounds the narrative. You are the victim. Your only job is to act surprised. She stood up, signaling the meeting was over. We have the law. We have the facts. We have the money. But they have the story. They have the press. When this detonates, they will control the narrative. Qley will paint you as bitter, as a vengeful ex. You need to be prepared for that, I nodded. I am. But as I rode the silent elevator down, her words echoed. They control the story. The legal victory would be mine, but the public one. Qley was charismatic. I was conventional. She was a visionary. I was a pushover. She would twist this, paint herself as the creative woman held back by a jealous, controlling man. I walked out of the high-rise into the bustling afternoon. I needed one more thing. I needed an insurance policy. I needed to hand the story to someone who, like Annalise, was a shark. I went home and opened the guest list spreadsheet. I scrolled past the influencers and the VCs, looking for the media list. And there it was. Sarah Chen, TechCrunch, I knew the name. Sarah Chen didn't write puff pieces about synergy. She was a hatchet woman. She built her career on eviscerating frauds, on exposing the hollow promises of Silicon Valley. She was famous for it. She would be at the launch, looking for a story. Qley was about to hand her the biggest one of her career. I left my house. I didn't take my phone. I walked 10 blocks to a public library, the one I hadn't been to since Leo was a kid. I sat at a public terminal, the keyboard sticky, the plastic mouse warm from the last user. The air smelled of dusty paper and stale coffee. I created a new, anonymous, encrypted email account. Archimedes 1998. My fingers flew over the keyboard. To sarah.chenutechcrunch.com. Subject: The real story of Auraspace you won't see on stage M's. Chen, you are attending the Auraspace launch at the Apex in 2 days. You think you're covering a wellness app. You're actually covering a crime. The founders, Chloe Jensen and Julian Vance, did not create Auraspace. They stole it. Attached, you will find, a side-by-side comparison of the Auraspace pitch deck and the 1998 graduate thesis of Mark Jensen, Chloe's husband. The IP is a 1.1 match. The LLC registration for Auraspace, filed by Julian Vance. Bank records showing a fraudulent $150,000 transfer from Mark Jensen's home equity line to the Auraspace LLC. The real architect of Auraspace won't be on the stage. He'll be in the audience, watching his wife and her lover present his stolen life's work as their own. I've attached Mr. Jensen's photo. You'll know him when you see him. A friend of the truth. I took the encrypted flash drive from my pocket, the one Annalise had copied and returned to me. I plugged it in. I attached the core files, the side-by-side, the bank transfer, the LLC filing. I looked at the screen. This was the final irreversible step. The legal plan would take their money. This would take their names. I didn't hit send. I clicked the small clock icon. Schedule send. I set the date for the launch. I set the time for 6 p.m., 1 hour before the party. Just enough time for a shark to smell the blood in the water. I hit the schedule button. I logged out, wiped the browser, and shut down the machine. I walked out of the library into the cool evening air. The city lights were just beginning to flicker on against the deepening blue of the sky. The trap was set. The timer was counting down. All I had to do now was walk into the center of it and wait for it to spring. I chose the suit I'd worn to my father's funeral. Black, severe, perfectly tailored. It was a uniform for the end of something. As I fastened my watch, a simple, elegant piece from a life that felt 1,000 years old, my hands were perfectly steady. I wasn't nervous. I was an architect on demolition day, standing at a safe distance, holding the plunger. Qley was a whirlwind of frantic, ecstatic energy. She was already in her dress, a stark, sculptural white column, and was pacing the living room, shouting into her phone at a publicist. Yes, on the hour. The stream has to go live at 7:30 exactly, she barked. She saw me. Mark, finally. My driver is here. Julian's meeting me there. You're taking your own car, right? I can't be late. I'll be right behind you, I said, my voice the familiar, dull monotone I had perfected. Good. And Mark? She stopped, her eyes bright and hard. Try to look happy. Please. This is the first day of my new life. I will, I said. She gave me a quick, dry kiss on the cheek, her skin smelling of expensive setting spray. Then she was gone, a flash of white disappearing into the black town car. I drove myself. The Apex was a new skyscraper, a monument of glass and steel that pierced the fog. I parked in the cavernous concrete garage, the scent of curing cement and new paint sharp in the air. I took the elevator up, not to the main hall, but to the observation deck. I needed a moment. I stood at the window, 40 stories up, looking down on the city. The lights were a vast, glittering circuit board. I could see the glow of the Apex's event hall 3 floors below me, a beacon of blue light. The email I'd sent to Sarah Chen had been delivered exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes ago. The process server was, at this moment, checking in as an investor. Annalise Reed was at her desk, a direct line to the bank's legal counsel open. All the pieces were in place. The machine I had designed was running. I checked my watch. 7 to 15 p.m. Time to go. The sound hit me first. A deep, pulsing bass line, like a mechanical heart, overlaid with the high-pitched, brittle chatter of 150 people. The room was vast, a 2-story cavern with floor-to-ceiling windows. The entire space was washed in the Aurospace brand color, a cold, antiseptic blue. Waiters in black moved through the crowd, holding trays of champagne and appetizers that looked like surgical instruments. I saw Julian holding court near a massive, glowing Aurospace logo. He was in a black t-shirt and a velvet blazer, a picture of disruptive arrogance, his arm slung casually around a venture capitalist. Then Qley found me. She grabbed my arm, her smile a brilliant, painful rictus. "There you are, perfect. Stand here." She physically positioned me, like a prop. "Jeremy, look who's here." My wonderful husband, Mark. He's been so supportive through this whole creative process. A man with a tablet and a press badge gave me a cursory glance. Great. So Qley. I let myself fade back, a shadow in my black suit. I drifted toward the bar, my eyes scanning, ticking off the checklist. Check. There, by a pillar, nursing a club soda. The process server, a nondescript man in his 50s, wearing an expensive but slightly rumpled suit. He looked like a mid-level investor, bored and unimportant. He was watching the stage. Check. There she was. Sarah Chen. I knew her from her profile. She was exactly as I'd pictured. Sharp, intense, dressed in a leather jacket that was pointedly out of place. She wasn't schmoozing. She was at the back, near the sound booth, her phone in her hand, her eyes darting between Qley, Julian, and me. She knew. The 6 p.m. email had landed. She wasn't just here to cover a launch. She was here to cover a kill. The lights went down. The thrumming music swelled. A massive screen above the stage lit up. A slick, empty video played, images of oceans, forests, and beautiful people meditating, all cut together with meaningless words. Integration, evolution, resonance, aurospace. The music hit a crescendo. The stage lights came up, and there they were. Qley and Julian side by side, hands clasped, raised in triumph. The applause was deafening. Qley, in her white dress, looked like a priestess. Julian, in his velvet, her dark acolyte. "Thank you," Qley's voice boomed, full of a breathless, manufactured emotion. "Thank you for coming to the birth of a revolution." She was brilliant. I had to give her that. She spoke of feeling stifled by old paradigms. She spoke of authentic connections. She spoke of synergy. It was a masterpiece of empty jargon, and the crowd was eating it up. Julian stood beside her, the picture of the strong, silent tech genius, nodding as she built their shared mythology. My heart was a cold, steady drum. I checked my watch. 7:30 p.m. "But the core of Aurospace," Qley said, her voice dropping to a confidential hush, "came from a single revolutionary idea." She clicked the remote. The screen behind her changed. Slide 12, my diagram. My life's work, rendered in her sterile blue branding. "We call it," she said, her voice filled with a false, reverent awe. "The resonance effect." That was the cue. I saw the man in the rumpled suit push himself off the pillar. He began to walk, not quickly, but with an unhurried, undeniable purpose, toward the side steps of the stage. Qley was still speaking. "It's a new architecture for being a way to..." The man was on the stage. He walked directly toward them. Qley's smile froze. Her words died in her throat. Julian stepped forward, his arm out. "Hey, pal, this is a private..." "Qley Jensen?" The man's voice was flat, professional. It wasn't amplified, but in the sudden, shocked silence, it carried. "Julian Vance?" He held out 2 thick 9x12 legal envelopes. "You've been served." A collective audible gasp went through the room. Qley stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. Julian snatched his, and as they both tore open the seals, their phones, resting on the podium, buzzed. A harsh electronic BZT, then again, Bizet's T, the bank alerts. The asset freeze. Annalise's emails. I watched Qley's face. It was a slow-motion collapse. The high color drained, leaving her skin a waxy, sallow white. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, scanned the first page. I knew the words she was seeing. Fraud, injunction, intellectual property theft, punitive damages. Julian's reaction was faster. He didn't read. He looked at his phone, at the bank alert. Account frozen. His head snapped up, his eyes darting around the room, not in confusion, but in a raw animal panic. He was looking for the exits. Sarah Chen was already on her feet, her phone held high, its flash cutting through the dim. She wasn't just filming. She was striding toward the stage, her voice sharp. "Qley, Julian! Is it true you stole the entire concept from Mark Jensen?" The investors in the front row, the ones who had just given them $2 million, were on their feet, their faces pale. "What is this?" one of them shouted. The chaos was perfect. It was time. I moved, walking calmly from the back of the room. All eyes were on the disintegrating scene on stage. I walked up the side steps, not the ones the server used, but the ones near the moderator's empty podium. Qley saw me. Her face, which had been a mask of horror, contorted into something new, a dark, venomous rage. "Mark?" she whispered, her voice a broken croak. "You!" I didn't look at her. I stepped up to the podium and took the live microphone. A high, piercing screech of feedback cut through the room, silencing every voice. The entire chaotic party went dead quiet. Everyone turned. The investors, the press, Julian frozen in his tracks, and Qley, her world imploding. Sarah Chen's phone camera, its light a blinding white circle, swung directly to my face. "Good evening," I said. My voice was amplified, filling every corner of the vast, silent room. It was bitterly calm. For those of you who don't know me, I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting every eye lock onto mine. I'm Mark, Qley's husband. I looked directly at her, at the ruins of my wife. And I'm the original architect of Aurospace. My voice echoed in the vast, sudden silence. I could feel the heat of a dozen cell phone spotlights, all trained on my face. Sarah Chen's camera was a blinding white eye, unblinking. Qley's face was a mask of chalky disbelief, her mouth half open. She stared at me, not as a husband, but as an alien, a thing she had never seen before. Julian was the first to move. He'd read the room, read the situation, and was already executing his exit strategy. "This is insane," he stammered, his eyes darting to the investors. "This is a domestic dispute. It has nothing to do with the business." "It has everything to do with the business," I said, my voice cutting through his. I looked past him, to the investors in the front row, to the journalists. The open relationship she offered me, it wasn't about evolution. It was a distraction, a cover, so I wouldn't look too closely at our bank accounts. "You're lying." Qley's voice was a high, tearing shriek. She lunged for the microphone. I didn't move. I let her grab it. This was part of the plan. Let them build the house of cards. Let them tear it down. He's a bitter, jealous man. She screamed into the mic, the feedback whining. He couldn't stand to see me succeed. "He's trying to destroy me." "Then explain the bank transfer, Qley." Sarah Chen's voice snapped from the floor. She was holding her phone up like a weapon. "Explain the fraudulent $150,000 transfer from your joint account to his LLC. Was that jealousy?" Julian's head snapped toward Qley. "You used his money?" he hissed, his voice just low enough for the mic to catch. He'd been played too. He thought she had her own capital. "And explain this," I said. I tapped the podium. The technician at the back, sensing the drama, switched the feed. The screen behind us, which had shown my diagram, now flickered. I had given Sarah Chen the file. She must have forwarded it. My original thesis appeared, side by side with their pitch deck. My 1998 signature next to their 2025 logo. My hand-drawn lines next to their bastardized blue rendering. It was an execution. The investors were shouting now. "It's a fraud! She stole it." Julian didn't wait. He didn't defend her. He didn't say another word. He just turned, vaulted off the side of the stage, and ran. He didn't just walk. He ran, shoving his way through the stunned crowd, his velvet blazer disappearing into the lobby. A true disruptor. Qley stood alone on the stage, the bright white light pinning her like a specimen. She looked from the screen to my face to the angry crowd. The mask of the wellness visionary cracked, and for a second, I saw the real person beneath, a desperate, terrified, hollowed-out woman. Then the rage returned, a pure, venomous hatred aimed entirely at me. I set the microphone down. My work here was done. I walked off the stage. The process server in the rumpled suit met my eye and gave me a single professional nod. Sarah Chen tried to stop me, to shove her phone in my face. "Mr. Jensen, a comment!" I just shook my head and kept walking, pushing through the double doors, leaving the implosion behind me. The aftermath was, as Annalise had promised, swift. Sarah Chen's article went viral before noon the next day. The title was brutal: Aura Space, the Architecture of a Fraud. It was a meticulous, scathing takedown, complete with copies of my thesis, the wire transfers, and a minute-by-minute account of the launch party's collapse. She called the open relationship a callous and calculated smokescreen for grand larceny. The app was dead. The investors, led by the man in the front row, filed a class action lawsuit against both Qley and Julian. The district attorney, spurred by the public evidence, opened a criminal investigation into wire fraud. Julian, true to form, tried to save himself. He turned on Qley, claiming he was the victim, that she had presented the IP as her own. Their relationship, built on a shared con, disintegrated in a flurry of mutual accusations. The divorce was not a negotiation. It was a surrender. Annalise Reed was surgical. With the criminal charges hanging over her, Qley signed everything. She walked away with her clothes, her wellness powders, and her personal brand, which was now toxic. I kept the house. I kept my money. I kept my work. That was 6 months ago. John Coltrane's Blue Train was playing, the clear, searching notes of the saxophone filling the living room. The sun was streaming in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The house was quiet. But it wasn't the cold, sterile, empty nest silence of before. It was a productive quiet. The oppressive, cloying smell of lemongrass was long gone. The air now smelled of fresh ground coffee, old paper, and sawdust. I was in my study. Or rather, where my study used to be. The wall was gone. I had taken a sledgehammer to it myself, opening the small concrete room into the main living space. The house was no longer a series of containers. It was one integrated open space. My space. My old drafting table, the one from college, sat in the center of the room, bathed in morning light. It was covered in new blueprints. My blueprints I had spent the last 2 months redesigning. Not just the house, but the concept. The thesis I had abandoned 23 years ago. Auraspace was a dead name, toxic and buried in lawsuits. My new letterhead, sitting on the corner of the table, simply read, Jensen. Architectural resonance. I wasn't building an app. I was designing a building, a real one, a small proof-of-concept wellness center based on the original, too academic principles of my thesis. The resonance effect, done right. I was funding it myself. I heard the front door chime. Leo was home from college for the weekend. I heard him drop his bag, grab a drink from the new fridge. Hey, Dad! Smells good in here. What are you working on? I looked up from the vellum. He walked over, peering at the complex lines, the notes I'd scrawled in the margins. Whoa, this is cool. This is like that old project you told me about once, isn't it? I smiled. It is. It's about time, he said, and clapped me on the shoulder. He went to his room, and the house settled back into its comfortable, working quiet. I looked at the design. I had been a pushover. I had let my fear of loss, my desire for a quiet life, blind me. I had let someone else write my story, steal my work, and define my space. Never again. I took a sip of my coffee, the taste rich and dark. I picked up my .5mm pencil, the graphite cool and familiar against my fingers. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was waiting for what came next. And for the first time in years, so was I.